Hello class, this is Professor Tweed here, and I'm going to do a playlist for these YouTube videos that really don't directly relate to class, but in a lot of the videos that I've shown for class assignments, which are useful Illustrator and Photoshop tools for anybody, I've shown basic things of how to do this and how to do that as applied to architectural rendering, but when it comes to options and textures and effects, I sort of just show options and I don't go into any details because they take quite a while and they were beyond the point of those videos. So I'm going to make this playlist that just takes a video and looks at a certain particular effect, not even at the drawing level like we see up here on screen, but just so you know how to go about applying it and doing it. So if you do want to use it in a drawing, you can go in and look at that video and see that. And so I've got a bunch that I'll do over time, and but I encourage anyone to also say, hey, I've got this, I want to try to do this, how do I do it? Let me know, put it in a comment, tell me, share a link of what you may want it to look like, whatever the case might be. I've gotten pretty good over the years at figuring out how to make something in Illustrator or Photoshop look like something else, either in the real world or in a hand drawing. And so that is what this is about. Just a few comments, some things that we'll see here. You know, I've got on the screen one that was meant to look sort of like a art marker here in this drawing, but you know, there's this one here I think I've shown before in other videos too, which is meant to look more like a watercolor like drawing. I've also shown something like this one, which isn't meant to emulate anything by hand per se, but it certainly doesn't quite have the same feel many Illustrator drawings do, at least if you're operating with just the basic tools. So so all these things, they take time. They're not too bad, but they definitely weren't right for those other videos, so we'll cover them here independently, and once you learn the technique, you'll have to apply it however you want to any drawing that you want as you go. And so, you know, I'll end up with something like, okay, well, here's how you do markers, and then you'll figure out then, oh, okay, now I know how to do that square, now I can turn it into trees or sky or wood pattern for a floor, for the floor plans, so on and so forth. I'm going to do Illustrator for most of these probably, although Photoshop, the ways to do them are often very, very similar, if not identical. Not everything might be able to be done in Photoshop. Alternatively, some things I do might only be able to be done in Photoshop, in which case I will switch to Photoshop for that. The reason why I prefer Illustrator is because Illustrator, you tend to have more control over editing and control over creation of the art. That's what Illustrator is great for creating art. And if you want to use it in Photoshop, you can either, again, recreate it as best you can using Photoshop, which is usually possible, or just save it as a image, a JPEG, or even an Illustrator file, and use it in Photoshop. So there's lots of options to get those things in Photoshop. So I like it because it's more, you have more control over what you can do, and I think it makes it more clear in explaining as well. So since this video is about education, because I can have a list of everything I've done in the attributes table, which I can't have in Photoshop. So at the end you can sort of take a look at the entirety of what's there, which is just a useful trick to say, oh, that's right, that's what I need to do. So I think it's good in that regard as well. I also think, as a third point, although it's not done in the profession, you know, when you're doing perspectives, it's so easy to get a 3D model out of a computer rendering, and of course you want to edit that in Photoshop as a base, and that's great. It's a great tool. I've been using it for a couple decades now. But I think there's something to be said, like, why not go back and have even more control? The fact that, I've talked about this in other drawings, that 3D modeling rendering engines, they tell you what this building looks like, which has its benefits, but it also removes some of the art out of it. And I think there's opportunity to take something like a line drawing, a line perspective from a modeler, and completely control the art entirely. And again, if you're creating art, usually the best place is to do it in Illustrator. So now, does this take more time than just hitting a button and have it go render while you do something else? Certainly does, which is probably why it will never catch on entirely in the profession, because there's got to be efficiencies. But I think there's something about drawing and learning how to use the tools that's sort of interesting about saying, hey, you know, I know this technology exists, but why don't I do it like it used to be done? I with my own decisions, say what every single material looks like and what every aspect looks like. So I have an example. I did it quickly And upon looking at it, I think maybe I did this one a little too rough, but the intention was it was meant to be loose. This is Illustrator. These are all straight lined objects in Illustrator. But I made it look much more sketchy feel to show that you can really have any sorts of control that you want. And this is just one option. I think there's an infinite variety of options, but we can see this is a perspective. It's not an elevation like the previous ones, or in my previous videos whenever I've done perspective it's always been in Photoshop. But here's it's a way that I can control any aspect of this drawing and really make it my own, and I think it'd be fun to sort of experiment with that. Take the lines in, and every rendering is my own. It's not what the computer says. And so that will go into this too. So by collecting a variety of textures, you can really make anything the way you want to look. Again, I encourage people to submit ideas to me, and maybe at a certain point in time I can get to and add to this playlist. So have fun. I hope these videos are helpful.